We get to chapter 4 and verse 25, we see again this woman at the well that we've been talking about. If you remember, this is a woman who comes to the well to draw water, and she has an encounter with Christ. We recognize that when she got there and she began to talk to him, that it was an unusual situation for him, being Jewish, to talk to this woman who was a Samaritan. Not only was it ethnically challenging that these two individuals would speak together, it also became challenging from the gender standpoint, that she is a woman and he is a man, and in the custom of that day, women and men did not share conversations in the open like this, especially with what would be a stranger. She did not know Christ, and because she did not know him, it would not have been usual for a woman to stop and have a conversation with a man in the public confine. Not only is she a Samaritan, not only is she a woman, but apparently there are some other issues that are going on in her life, as we talked about last week and clarified during our question and answer period, with regards to the number of husbands that Christ said that she had. Said that she had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your own. I think here we can see many dimensions of this text as it unfolds, and we can look at this and we can think, Brother Ahmed, in different ways about this text. And as we do that, we sometimes tend to ask more questions about her situation, in terms of what did it really mean when this particular text says there that she had 5 husbands. What did that really mean in verse 18? Verse 18, where he says, "For thou hast had 5 husbands, and he whom thou now hast is not thy husband." And so there are questions in terms of how we apply that, and what questions about her life. But Sister Kelly Bivens, I would tell you that if we think about her life, if we overly think about her life, we began to miss the point. Because I would submit to you, Sister Spencer, that the real point here is not that we ask more questions about her, but that we might ask questions about ourselves. I think that if we would look at this point, if we look at it even on the surface, Brother Chauncey Hogg, we recognize that she had some mistakes in her past. She had some things that have happened in her past that she now cannot lay claim to. Because here we see that it is in the past tense that she had 5 husbands. And the one she has now, she cannot lay claim to. In other words, we recognize that what she had, she no longer has. Let's get that clear. Simple point, but very clear. What she had, she no longer has. And what she has, she doesn't have. Okay, now let me make sure we got that. What she had, she no longer has. And what she has, she doesn't have. The 5 husbands of the past, she no longer has them. The husband that she supposedly has now is still not hers. And so my point is, as we look at that in that simplified mode, I ask the question, Sister Risa Jones, Sister Risa Moore, what do we have? What do we have? What are we holding on to? What keeps us from starting over? What keeps us from being able to regenerate new life? What keeps us from being able to find the freshness of a new day? What is it that we hold on to that is just an illusion? It really, Brother Sloan, does not belong to us, but we still hold on to it as an illusion. We still hug the illusion. We still hold on to it. We still want it to be real, even though it is not real. How many of us are chasing the ghost of the past? Time has changed and things have moved on and life has moved on, but you are still holding on to stuff that you really don't have. You're grasping on to what used to be. You're grasping on to some yesterday that was not yours, and as you grasp hold to it today, you still have nothing. So at what point do we wake up and like this woman, begin to ask ourselves some questions. Allow Christ to come into our life and ask the right questions. What do you have? So you have been caught up in theft, and you steal. Interestingly enough, just to kind of make this point, I was watching somebody the other day who I see as they are morally challenged. Not exactly a criminal, but morally challenged. On the borderline of morality. Some would say what they do is okay, and others would say no. And so, as many of our young people know, as our teens know, I am a person who is almost fascinated with social media. Partly because my academic background causes me to look at people. I'm always interested in our current anthropology. What are we doing? What are we thinking? What kind of history are we making? And sometimes as I look at our current social media, it's interesting that I see history being made both individually and collectively. And as I look at it, sometimes I wonder, Brother White, if we're not crazy somehow. Because some of the stuff we post is just really interesting. And I have to look sometimes and scratch my head, did they really say that? And some of you know this and some of you don't know this, but actually I happen to take a look at most of the members of this church. And one of the reasons why is because most of you care nothing about your privacy. You don't know who is watching you. And so therefore, I have about 3 other accounts, and you have no idea that it is your pastor that sees you every week. And I look and I think, wow, this is just nuts. And sometimes I have to scratch my head and I wonder, why would you do that? And so I've watched this particular person who actually is a member of this congregation. I watched this particular person. And if it's you, don't holler because they'll know it's you. But I'm not going to say it's you, but I might be talking about you. And I watched them do certain things to gain money. And then I watched the next page. You know what the funny part about sinful culture is? And when I say sinful culture, I'm talking about when you live on the edge of morality. I'm talking about maybe you dealing drugs, or you're selling food stamps, or whatever your particular crime might be. I noticed that as soon as they flash the dollars, and for those of you who follow social media, you recognize that people actually are dumb enough to take pictures of themselves with a handful of $100 bills. And, they actually called this into court once because this woman wanted her child support, and she showed the judge the picture of this fool showing all of his $100 bills. But it's funny. You'll see, where they're bankrolling, and they got this big wad of money. Then the next picture is everybody sitting out at the local seafood restaurant, and lobsters all on the table, and they're drinking Monet, and what is it? That rock y'all drink, Ciroc. And they got the rock out there and all of this Patron. That's the one I'm trying to think of. And they got all these pictures of all the liquor that they're living big. And so they're drinking, they're eating. And then you see the next scene, and if it's a woman, you'll see where she has gone to the Coach store, and she's bought a brand new Coach, and she's bought all kinds of purses and this kind of thing, and then she wants the Chanel and all of that, and you'll see where she's buying all of this stuff. If it's one of the guys, you'll see that he's got his new kicks on, his tennis shoes, and these are the latest and the greatest, and he's got on the finest clothes, and he just finished buying some doctor's used Mercedes, because it's never new, but it's somebody else's that they've already wore out, but it's new to you, so you think it's the greatest Mercedes in the world. And so now they've got the new car and all of that kind of thing. And then they'll take a picture of them and about 3 or 4 different relationships that they've been in, and 5 or 6 different sets of children outside of an apartment building. at that and I think, wow, you've had 5 husbands. What you had, you don't have. And what you have, you still don't have. Because it's interesting how we spend our resources. We make all of this. I got all of this bank. But now what do you have to show for it? What do you have? I've said it before. I wish I could make it plainer, but you know your pastor, and that's probably why everybody does not attend this church, but I'm just going to say it as plain as I could. I wish some old floozies would tell some new floozies that that don't keep a man. It's just the best way I can say it. Because oftentimes we do everything we can to hold on to the past. And we think we really got it going on. I'm telling you, you need to go to the well. You need to go to the well and find out that all of that stuff that you're still hanging on to, all of those high school and college dreams that you're still holding on to, all of those fantasies, you no longer have it. And I got news for you. The stuff you think you got now, you still don't have. That's the reality that she had to come to. As I said to you 2 weeks ago, in a book that I read, From Good to Great, one of the things that it tells us is that the enemy of great is good. Because as long as you think that it's good enough, you'll never try to be great. I'm saying to you that that woman who came to the well discovered that what she thought was good, her life was okay, could never be great if she did not begin to ask herself some questions. So today, I say to you that we must begin to ask the right questions. All of the stuff that you did, all of the stuff that you're doing. If I might bring up, that great writer Maslow, who talked about self-actualization. Some of you might remember that reading. Talked about the hierarchy that we need in order to feel as if we have accomplished something in life. I would say that every Christian needs to think about his or her purpose and needs to question and examine whether or not you have accomplished and whether or not you are accomplishing. Number one, what God has called you to accomplish. Are you pleasing God? And then I would ask you to go a step further. And if you find out that you're not pleasing God, ask yourself the question, are you pleased? Are you really, honestly pleased? Do you have anything to show for the deal that you've made with the devil? I would say to you today that if you're going to make a deal with the devil, at least make sure that he pays up. Get something here, because there's nothing for you later. And so at the very least, ask the question whether or not what I've done and how I've lived, do I have anything to show for it? And so I just remind you again, what she had, she doesn't have. And what she has, she still doesn't have. And so as we look at this woman, he asked that question and he begins to talk to her, and he's talking about water that could live on the inside of her, as we understand is a symbol of the Holy Spirit as he's talking, the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit living within you. And so then as he talks to her, we come to verse number 25, where the woman said to him, I know the Messiah cometh, which is called Christ. When he is come, he will tell us all things. He had just finished telling her about worship. Remember, he said worship in spirit and in truth, that you need to honestly worship. You need to have authentic worship. And after saying that we need authentic worship, she then follows up once again with a rebuttal to what he says. Notice that this whole conversation, he says something that will help her, and she brings forward her own obstacle and her own mountain. And so now she says, I know the Messiah coming. He gonna teach us when he comes. And so let me tell you that if you want to start over, number one, don't miss what you've been waiting on. Don't miss what you've been waiting on. Far too often, the thing that will bless us, Sister Ruffin, is right there in our face. And you know why it's in our face? One is because we can find it as biblical principle. He says the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And so anything that is at your hand is in your reach. See, there are some people that would tell you that God is far from us and that heaven is far from us, and it takes too much to be a Christian, and it's going to be hard. But let me tell you, he said it's at hand. So therefore, it means, Sister JC, that he has not called us to do something impossible. He has called us to do the possible. It's one of the reasons that it really bothers me when folk tell me, well, you'll never be like Christ. Perfection is just not possible. Do you know that if I thought that I could never, ever be like Christ, I would leave this church and never return? I'm here because I believe that I can be like him. Because he said, take up the cross and follow me. Because he said, greater things than these I'm able to do. Ye shall do greater things than these. I'm able to do even greater according to the words of Christ. Forget all that stuff that somebody might have told you. Check what the text says. The Bible admonishes us to have purpose in our lives. The Bible admonishes us not to be waiting on Christ to come, but to do because Christ has come. This woman is allowing her waiting to come between her and the purpose that God has for her. Far too often, we are waiting on something. Oh, I'm going to church when I finally get it right. When I get my life together, I'm going to church. You will never be ready to go if you're waiting to get your own life together. And so we cannot continue to say, I'm waiting on some sign. I'm waiting on this. I'm waiting on that. He has already given us the great gift. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever, not just the special folks, but anybody, can come to him because he's already given us a great gift. And that great gift should motivate us to move beyond the mountains and the obstacles that even we place for ourselves. And so don't miss what you've been waiting on. That's how you start over. You've been waiting to start over. Well, guess what? Like I said the other Sunday, Dorothy, you've had the shoes on all the time. All you had to do is click your heels 3 times and you'd be home. It's already there. All you had to do is connect with God. And he said, I'm standing at the door and knocking. If any man will just open the door, I'll come in and sup with him. So therefore, it's already in your reach. It's already in your grasp. All you need to do, don't you hear the doorbell ringing, is go to the door. Open the door, let him in. He's here. And so we have to start over. This is why I didn't like the Message Bible. The Message Bible, in verse 28, it says, the woman then left her water pot and went her way into the city and saith to the men. You know what, before we get there, I got to give you this. This is kind of parenthetic since Jackie Turner, but this isn't in the notes. This is the stuff you're going to get, and I'm not going to charge you no extra at the door. Look at verse 27. And upon this came his disciples and marveled that he talked with the woman, yet no man said, what seekest thou, or why talkest thou to her? If I might just stop for a minute, this should have been in my notes. Because this right here is good. If you're trying to start over, don't let people get in your way. She came back and I don't care what anybody says, and the worst kind of folk to deal with, Mother Chapman, are the folk who do dirty stuff but say nothing. See, there are folk who just got big mouths. They're going to talk no matter what. But then there are folk who think stuff but won't say nothing. Oh, Sister Bagwood said, yep, I know what you're talking about. They will look at you funny. They will make little gestures. They're thinking it. You know they're thinking it, but they don't say anything. And so these folk came back, the disciples came back, and they were looking and they were surprised and all shocked that he was talking to this woman. And what's interesting is that they might have been shocked and surprised and looking at each other or whatever they were doing because they're marveling at this, but they don't say anything. But there was a reason they couldn't say anything. Because if they honestly took a look at themselves, the same question could have been asked about them. They're wondering, why was he talking to her? Question is, why he letting y'all follow him around? I don't know where this falls chronologically, but had it fell after he had stooped down in the sand and wrote in the sand and got up and told them that without sin cast the first stone, this would have been a very good time for the disciples to think about that. Because the fact is, oftentimes we're looking and spectating and wondering, why is God blessing them? Why is the Lord talking to them? The question is, why does he fool with you? I love that new song that says, you know, he calls me friend. Who am I that God would think about me and he calls me a friend? You know, in that 12, he had one that would later deny him. In that 12, he had one that would later betray him. In that 12, he had folk that, as we say, got ghost as soon as the time came for him to be in trouble. And they were wondering why he would talk to that woman. And so while you're sitting in the church wondering about me, wondering why would the Lord talk to me, or why would I come to the church? I come to the church for the same reason you come to the church. Because I'm weary, wounded, and sad. I come to the church because I know what it means to have and think you have and have nothing.
All right.
I know what it means to get to the well and have my dipper, and only to realize that my dipper won't bring me the kind of water that I need. I know what it means. I can identify with this woman. How dare you turn your face up, turn your nose up, squint your eyes at somebody? Who are you? And so don't let other people come in the way of your turnaround. Don't let other folk cause you to miss God's blessings. Then, if you look at 28, it says, the woman then left her water pot and went her way into the city and said to the men, she left her water pot. This is the part of the message Bible that I really don't like, because they actually tried to figure out why she left her water pot. The text doesn't tell us in the original Greek or here in the King James why she left it. What it tells us is that she left it. And the fact is, in order for us to start over, we need to leave our water pot. Because remember, Jesus had already explained to her that her little pot wouldn't do it. She already knew that her water pot had limitations. Her water pot, if you remember, as I told you earlier on, her water pot was even limited by race. Because some of you might believe that in the South they started this tradition of Jim Crow laws where whites and blacks could not drink out of the same fountain. But I will tell you right here in this particular chapter, when she says, well, what will you drink out of? She's reminding him that Jews and Samaritans don't drink out of the same pot. Her pot already had some limitation. Let me tell you that as each of us comes together, our pot has limitation. Our pot is not able to bring us the water that is everlasting. Our pot is not able to bring us the joy, the peace, the love that we truly need. Our pot causes us to find ourselves in situations where we thought we had, but we have nothing, where we think we have, and we still have nothing. Our pot needs to be left at the well. Could you long enough leave your ego aside? Could you long enough to leave your fashion senses aside? Could you long enough lay your education aside? Could you long enough leave your beauty and your handsome face aside? Can you step outside of yourself long enough to let the Lord deal with the things that are troubling you on the inside? The physical stuff is what she was worried with. She was thinking about this well and physical water. He was thinking about her soul and her spirit. There's some folk today who come to church because they're looking for a gold mine. I need the Lord to pronounce a word over me so that I can buy a new car, get a new job, and have some money. But worship tells us that we're willing to acknowledge God even when he's not giving us anything. God is not our ATM machine. God is worthy even if he doesn't do another thing because he saved our soul. It is not about the physical. It is about your soul. So we've got to leave behind some things. Leave behind some preconceived notions. Leave behind our limitations. Leave behind our own cognitive abilities to try and put God out when God says, I want to be in. Then, I love what this woman does, Brother Daniel Fisher, because she leaves her water pot. Notice in 29, she goes and said, come see a man, which told me all things that ever I did. Is not this the Christ? Some time ago, I was taking a course, lecture series. They were talking about how to preach, how to present a message. And I think many of you know that I'm a planner. I like to think ahead. I don't like to wait. Let's plan it out. Let's think about it. How are we going to do this? So, now I've always been bothered, probably about 10 years ago. Pastor Jerry Carter told me, Jerry Carter of Mount Pierre Baptist Church, he told me, he said, do you know that most of what you preach on Sunday, they don't remember? He said, most of what people hear, they don't remember. He said, that's why commercials keep coming on over and over and over again. I heard him and I respected what he had said and I thought about it. I gave it some thought and over the past 10 years I've given it a lot of thought. Because, you know, I really don't want for you to leave and not have what you need. And so I started planning. One thing, that's why worship is not as long at Liberty Hill. That's why you go all over the town and after worship is over, you can still find a seat at the restaurant because the other church haven't let out yet. That's why we can get them down the road. There's 4 pretty good sized churches on the street. And we can get down the road easy because the others, the security guards, are still waiting in their parking lots trying to wait for their cars to start coming out. When we get out, their lots are still full. For some of them, we could even go to their worship if we wanted to because the preacher hadn't even started preaching when we leave. I had to think about it. I said, now, you know, what keeps us in worship now? There was some old guard folk that said, you know, what keeps us in worship is that we don't want to quench the spirit. But I began to look and I began to ask the question, is the spirit moving? You know, if you do 25 announcements on Sunday, is the spirit moving in all 25 of those announcements? Or are we now in a culture that can read and can we print some of those announcements? We've been talking in our office about eliminating the announcements altogether. Some Sunday you might actually walk in here and find out that only 2 announcements are highlighted and the rest will be in your bulletin. Some will come through your life group. Why? Because I don't want to waste your time with that. If somebody is telling me that you're not going to remember when you leave, I don't want to waste that time with that. I don't want you to be asleep by the time the sermon comes up. And I thank God. I thank God for the opportunity to pastor a church whereby everybody is still awake. Look to your neighbor to the right and to the left and recognize that as I look at you this morning, you're still awake. I've been to a lot of churches, and by the time the sermon is about over, folk are dozing off and they're having to say amen 10 times to try to stay awake. But you're still awake. I've pastored another church, and I've been a part of churches whereby the preacher stands at the door and people are dragging, leaving like school teachers at 4 o'clock. But I'm so glad that somewhere around 12:45 folk leave this church and they're still saying, praise the Lord, and they're smiling and they're talking and they're upbeat and they're not dragging their kids, come on here, because you haven't spent a lot of time with foolishness. All right. We don't spend a lot of time in announcements, and we don't read some scripture 10 times that has nothing to do with the worship. I'm saying this because it is important for us to recognize sometimes why we do what we do. We do it because there is a process. And the process that is most important is the process of how to tell them. Notice that the woman, once she drops her water pot, she goes to tell them. So you say, preacher, what do you mean? In this preaching class, as I've continued to tell you, that I'm always trying to see how do we tell them better. So one of the ways that we tell you better is to make sure that we don't waste your time in worship. One of the other ways that we try to tell you better is rather than to have the regular Bible study that we have on Wednesday night, we have life groups. What do we talk about in life groups? The sermon from Sunday. Why do we talk about the sermons for Sunday? Because, again, the Lord sent a word to me from Pastor Carter. Pastor Carter said you got to tell them over and over again, and finally they might finally get it if you keep saying the same thing over and over again. He said that's why the commercial keeps coming on. It's so that you get it. So you hear it on Sunday. Then you go to a life group, and maybe you say, why are we going through the sermon again? And why are we reading scriptures? And why are we asking those questions again? Why? Because I want you to be qualified to tell it.
All right.
And in order to